This is something that I would really recommend to all dietitians who are either getting into the media or doing media now is think beyond the food box, because we all have lives outside of cooking and nutrition, and it's all about lifestyle too. So a dietitian who is successful like yourself can also be the voice of an insurance company, can also be the voice of a lifestyle brand, a clothing company, a cookware brand. It can be really, expanded to include a lot of different types of brands that also expand your opportunities for revenue streams.
Well, hey there. Welcome to Media Savvy, the podcast that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to get noticed by media and become the go-to expert that they keep coming back to. I'll be sitting down with successful writers, producers, and entrepreneurs to learn the tools and tactics they use to build their reputation and in turn boost their business. I'm your host, Taub-Dix, and I've been working with top-tier media outlets for more than 30 years, anywhere from traditional print publications to online and social platforms. And I'm sharing my nutrition guidance without gimmicks. But you don't have to be a dietitian for this podcast to speak to you. Through my one-to-one conversations, you'll learn how to build a strategy to get your name in the news and establish yourself as an authority in your field, no matter what the industry. With Media Savvy, I'm on a mission to inspire, motivate, and empower you to have the confidence and tools you need to shine in the spotlight. Are you ready? Let's get Media Savvy. Well, I am so excited to be here today, and get ready because you are going to love this interview with the one and only Parker Wallace. And if you ever wanted to take a peek behind the scenes and see what producers are looking for when they're trying to match the right talent with brands, Parker will tell you all about what you need to do to pitch to get picked. And just so that you know who you're listening to, Parker Wallace is an Emmy-nominated culinary lifestyle expert and entrepreneur. As a seasoned journalist, Parker spent the first part of her career as a writer, producer, TV reporter, and anchor, lots of hats, as well as the political reporter for NPR. She won several AP awards for her reporting and has been nominated twice for an Emmy Award. Parker transitioned her love of cooking and TV into a nutrition-focused business called RDTV, standing for Registered Dietitian Television, which is now called Good Life TV. She and her team train and book talents for broadcasting, digital, and social campaigns. Parker wears a perpetual smile and brings vibrant energy to her projects. Parker, welcome to Media Savvy.
Thank you so much for having me, Bonnie, or Bon, as I prefer to call you.
Well, first of all, building a brand that stands out really takes vision and guts, both of which I know that you have, but not everybody could do what you do.
Oh.
So could you just share what was the spark of inspiration that led you to create this unique niche? And also I know that as a talent broker, you do match talents to brands, but sometimes you are the talent. So could you just tell us a little bit about this?
Well, great question. And I will sum up a very long story of the last decade into something more condensed. The true story is I would never probably have started my own business if I hadn't gotten fired from a TV station as talent myself, and going through some real roller coasters in what is arguably one of the most cutthroat businesses on the planet, which is television. And I genuinely think, and I try to share this with my friends and colleagues and mentees who get frustrated, is that it's so often at those lowest points in our careers or where we feel we failed or haven't risen to the occasion that it really provides opportunities to pick a different path, take a chance, take a risk, and embark on something new. And that is both scary, but also can be inspirational. And it's what keeps me inspired to this day. And I'm not saying it's not a roller coaster at times when you are working for yourself, and especially when you grow a business to have a staff and you're responsible for payroll. But when it comes down to it, I think it really is that motor inside of you that can look past the difficulties to really see that vision of where you want to be. It's never going to be exactly what you expect, but it can certainly transform your life and other people's.
Yeah, well, it's obvious that you have this passion for connecting dietitians with brands, but why dietitians? I mean, does that relate to your own personal interest in food and cooking?
Listen, I thought that I was going to be Jada 2.0. And so the dietitian route was not what I was expecting to have as my career. When the Food Network was like, Parker, listen, we love you, but you're just not famous enough for your own show, and we'll put you on the Food Network star as top 5 and see how you do. And I was like, yeah, I really don't think that you're going to pick the tall blonde again for Food Network star. So I made the pivot, and I was actually doing a TV show myself in Austin when I met this beautiful dietitian, Adrienne Paxosa. This was back in like 2016. And she was doing a TV segment on the same show that I was. And she was, doing a great job, terrific presentation. And I thought to myself, maybe I didn't have to come out here to do this, and I could have paid Adrienne to do it. Or maybe, and then I started thinking, there are so many brands that I was contacting to work for myself as talent that would say, similar to the Food Network, we love you, but in that case, I wasn't a trained dietitian. And so I could speak to the messaging about health and antioxidants or nutrition in whatever capacity the messaging was, but I wasn't qualified to speak to it as an expert because I didn't have those credentials. So I found this incredible pool of RD talent where a lot of dietitians, as you know, Bonnie, would be doing local news segments in their hometowns where they lived. And they were doing all of this work, but they weren't getting paid by brands to talk about what they were talking about. So I would see instances where dietitians would be, making a smoothie with yogurt, but they weren't getting paid by the yogurt brand, or, talking about the benefits of a plant-based diet, but they weren't getting paid by any plant-based companies. So I sort of came in and was this quasi sort of agent, brand connector, negotiator on the behalf of the dietitians. And then this crazy business was shaped, and right around 2018, 2019 is when it really took off.
You really touched upon something that is a very hot topic these days. And I know you're involved very much so with dietitians, but the profession seems to unfairly be thrown under a bus lately, especially with the media stories that were in the Washington Post. And a lot of dietitians seem really unhappy. They feel overworked, overwhelmed, underpaid. And I know that we see a different face of the profession because we focus on the detour that we took, which is how to work with media and partnering with brands so that you can get those brands in the news, which is not as easy as it used to be.
No.
But do you have any comments about what's happening with dietitians? Like, what is your take about the success that you have seen with dietitians and how important it is for some dietitians to transition? And it's not even only dietitians. I'm picking on dietitians because they've been picked on lately. But I think that for so many professions, getting into media could really be so much more lucrative for them.
It's true. And I think that, to your point, I think dietitians have been unfairly demonized in this situation. I understand, obviously, from a very close proximity, how important disclosure is and what FTC regulations are. It's part of why we built our business around purchasing media. So all of the expectations could be managed. There was no worry about, from an editorial standpoint, where you're not paying for the airtime and you're having to do a verbal disclosure, and things can get really nebulous in that area of it's not paid for by the brand or the dietitian. So then how much disclosure do you need? And there are all these different sort of loopholes of what can work and what doesn't. And what worked 5 years ago is not going to work now. And so to me, that safety net and something that I would recommend to RDs who are doing media is to price accordingly. Price so you can purchase the segment or have the brand purchase the segment, and then you are covered. And when there is, on any show, whether it's, the Morning Blend in Tampa or ATL Live in Atlanta, there's always going to be that this segment is sponsored by, and then it can be your brand if you want to promote your profession, your company, or it can be, sponsored by the wonderful company or whatever brands that you're working with for that particular project.
Yeah. And that's, obviously disclosure is another whole topic altogether, which is so critical when you're working with the media. But I think that also a lot has to do with the person who is out there and feeling confident to ask for their price.
Yes.
This is why having someone like you as their agent, broker, whatever we want to, hat you want to wear, because sometimes you really make the bridge and help speak for them. But, my grandmother always had this expression that was every pot has its cover. And I think when searching for someone to partner with, how do you know what talent is a perfect fit for the brand campaign in terms of, what they put forth, what their specialties are, what their talents are, what their confidence is like? How do you know?
Well, that's a great question, Bonnie. I think that the primary question goes to the client. What is your vision for the ideal spokesperson? What does that person look like? Where are they from? What is inherent to their own brand of dietetics and their nutrition business or culinary specialty? And I think right now we're seeing a need for a lot more diversity in that space. So there's been, from the inside, giving you an insider's view, there's definitely been a push for more diversity in the dietitian world. I think out of 100,000 dietitians, there are only 3,000 dietitians of color. So that's something that has come up quite a bit recently, especially. And I think it also comes down to really ensuring that the ambassador for that brand, that whether it's that dietitian or that chef, is going to be an authentic fit. So somebody who can speak to whether it's a plant-based brand or a beef producer, or who is going to be that authentic voice, because that's always going to show through. That's always going to come through in terms of that level of authenticity. And I think that there's a real appetite for that now, especially after COVID. We've found so many more people who are aligning with brands, and I think that authentic voice really is heard clearly.
That's a theme that has been running through all of the podcasts that I've done so far, and whoever I've interviewed. It seems like authenticity is the foundation that we build our businesses on. And I know that I personally had the pleasure of collaborating with Parker once, and this is such an interesting connection here, because here's what happened: is I only briefly met her one or two times at conventions, so I didn't really know her well. And one day she called me and said that she thought I would be a perfect fit for one of her clients. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea which food brand she was representing, but then she told me it had nothing to do with food. And I might have been a little quiet on the other end. And I asked her why she chose me for the project. And it happened to be for eye care insurance. And she knew exactly what she was looking for. And when she was scouting out new talent, she looked for me, because I don't even know actually why she picked me.
Well,
but it was
Bonnie,
interesting.
But I will tell you, I think that, and this is something that I would really recommend to all dietitians who are either getting into the media or doing media now, is think beyond the food box, because we all have lives outside of cooking and nutrition. And it's all about lifestyle too. So a dietitian who is successful like yourself can also be the voice of an insurance company, can also be the voice of a lifestyle brand, a clothing company, a cookware brand. It can be really, expanded to include a lot of different types of brands that also expand your opportunities for revenue streams.
I think that that's so important. And that really opened my eyes to so many different things, because it's true. Even though we may be dietitians, we still wear clothing. Yeah. We still eat and cook in cookware. In this case, the interesting connection was that the eye care was something that I know I was directly involved with my mom. And
that was so amazing. And I didn't know that.
Yeah. And what was so wonderful about the piece that we wound up putting together, we did a satellite media tour together, which is where you do, like 10 to 20 to 30 shows in a very short span of time. But it wound up that, we showed pictures of my mom on there. And it was really very, very heartwarming for me, a very different experience for me. but it also kind of showed that what Parker just said is so true, that once you know how to do a media interview and you have the skills that it takes, you could talk about just about anything as long as you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that also can really empower you to think about those other parts of your life that you can share. Because what was the real point of connection in that entire story, Bonnie, was talking about your mom. And that is what a brand wants to understand. They want to hear that personal connection. Like anyone, a trained monkey can, rattle off lines that they've memorized. But when you're truly connected to a personal, emotional piece as part of that brand story, that's the win.
Yeah, this is where storytelling comes into play. And I think that when you're working with media, whether it is giving a presentation or doing a podcast or writing a story, whatever it is, it's that storytelling, especially opening with a story that is heartfelt and means a lot to you, really pulls in your audience very quickly. It makes a difference. And especially when it comes to podcasting, even though this is being recorded on video, most people will be listening to this in their cars or while taking a walk. That's how I listen to podcasts. So you really have to paint pictures with words when you're speaking. But I'm just curious, have you ever made a mistake with pairing a talent with a brand? And if you did, what was that like for you?
So it wasn't per se a mistake with the person. It was perhaps expecting that talent was either so overly qualified and prepared that I didn't need to do any real heavy lifting in terms of prepping them personally. For me, and this is something that I can share from working with hundreds of dietitians over the years now, is that in terms of, I would sort of come in from not really from a media training perspective, but from a performance aspect. And, the dietitians that I would work with would be tacticians with memorizing the messaging and, taking the direction on how to food style something. But where there was a lot of sort of missed connection was just what we were talking about, and really connecting with the camera, connecting with the audience, and bringing in your personality to the entire show. And so I could come in and actually say, okay, let's shake it out and let's talk about what you really like about this. What are you really doing? What's happening in the morning with the kids? And, you kind of take people out of that very siloed messaging and scripting, and you really get into the thick of it. And that's the fun part, the messy part, where you can share a story that makes somebody laugh and kind of go off script just enough to make it, again, feel real and feel like you.
Yeah, and I have had firsthand experience with you being there to say, you okay? Everything going all right? Just checking everything. But I had an interesting experience with the last SMT that I did. And this was the last interview of the day. So this was, I think, the 26th interview. And with the satellite media tour, just so that our audience understands, the TV stations are given a script.
Yeah.
And they ask questions, and you, or as the talent, you answer the questions. But there are often rogue reporters that will just ask whatever they want to ask. Yeah. They don't want to ask the script. So this was a day that went along just beautifully. Everything was great. And the last reporter said to me in my ear before we were on air, she said, "Did you get the questions I sent?" And I didn't get any questions that she sent. And I looked at the producer. The producer shook her head no. So I said, "No, we didn't get your questions." She said, "Oh, I really wanted you to answer my questions, but okay, fine. I'll go back to the script." And there was a part of me that really wanted to say, "Hey, go ahead. Ask me your questions. Go ahead. I'm ready for it." After a whole day, I was really fired up at that point.
Yeah.
But I didn't, because it wasn't my show. I was working for the brand and I didn't want to take a chance.
Yeah.
But that sometimes happens. I mean, you must see this with rogue reporters.
Oh, all the time. And that's part of what I like to help people with, because when somebody goes off script, and believe me, I've been on a live TV segment, for a beef client, and had an anchor say, "Well, I gave up meat because it's healthier." And I just, without skipping a beat, said, "And you know what? That low iron might make you really grumpy in the morning. Like you are." And it was just you might be iron deficient, honey. So, you just have to kind of roll with it. And the bottom line is one of my mentors told me a long time ago, no live television segment is going to be as good or as bad as you think it is. And so even in the worst moments, where you make a mistake or you stumble, it's never going to be quite as bad as you think it is. And
yeah, that's true. That's true. And of course, pivoting helps. Taking them to a different topic altogether is really helpful. One person once asked me in the middle of an interview, "Hey, what do you think about the keto diet? My brother-in-law's on it. Could you tell me about it?" I was on TV, doing this TV segment, and I said, "You know what? Call me." And then went right to what I wanted to say.
Perfect.
But a lot of people don't realize what goes into a 3-minute segment.
Oh my gosh.
And for a segment, like my husband knows that if I have a TV segment to do, like don't talk to me for days. Like I practice 3-minute segments for days. And whether it's writing the script or setting the scene or food styling, can you tell us a little bit about what goes on in a typical 3-minute segment that you have to set up for?
Wow. Yeah. And it's a lot. It's funny. I was just sharing this with somebody outside of the industry, like, well, can't you just like point and talk? And I'm like, the setup, prepping the props, you might have to, order some things on Amazon to align with the color. Like I think through like color palette, fresh florals to make something pop. And my worst nightmare is when I see anyone doing a sponsored television segment where it's like, it's almost like 3 stations and it's like, this is this, this is this, this is this. And you want to make sure that like the entire table is lush and filled with, we eat with our eyes first. So to me, it's all about really eye-catching moments and that interaction. So making sure that you take the time to set up a demo. And that's whether it's the mise en place, where if you're doing it live in studio and you can interact and have the anchors like assign them to do something. And that means extra prep for you on the setup, but bringing the extra ramekin so they can dump the elements into the, yogurt bowl or the smoothie bowl, and giving them something to actually interact with while you're doing the messaging. Because the worst thing, and I experienced this as an anchor when I would interview dietitians or chefs, is that it's typical to see somebody stop cooking and start talking. Or if they start talking, they stop cooking, and so you want to make sure that they're able to, you're able to focus on what your messaging is while they're doing. And it's like the perfect party that way.
And, as a producer, unless you see someone in action ahead of time, you might not know that. Like that's really a risky situation.
Yeah, sometimes it can be. I mean, and I think that to your point of asking if there was ever mistakes made, I think that to me, and this is some advice that I would give to anyone who does make a mistake, I always like to get ahead of that. And if something happened, if the messaging was wrong, if you said something that was incorrect or said, oranges instead of mandarins or, salmon instead of tilapia, which is what a talent one time did with a tilapia client. It was like, problem is you got the entire fish group wrong. You said salmon and it was a tilapia client. So in that situation, it's always best to own it, get ahead of it, admit that you made a mistake, and figure out what that make good is. And whether that's doing the segment over again, which can be a real pain, but worth it to maintain and keep that brand relationship positive, and going the extra mile. So you're ensuring that, even if it's adding them into an extra social post to make up for a bit of missed messaging, that can really be a win for the brand. And they see that you're working to over deliver and ensure that they're happy with what you produced.
Yeah, that's so important. And, I know that you are often the middle person between the brand and the talent. Mm-hmm. But I think that relationship between the talent and the brand is also so important. And I know that I work with a lot of PR firms that connect me with brands, but I'm always sure that I make that connection with the brand too, so that they know that I am in their corner, that I love their products. I will never work with a brand unless it's something where I use their product myself, yep, or I would feed it to my kids. Well, and I feed it to my kids. So I think that coming back to authenticity, that has a lot to do with if you kind of mess something up, then as you say, own up to it and go back and see what you could do to make that better.
Right.
And this is of course live TV, but if you're able to record and you could just say, hey, wait a second, could I take that over again if something is recorded? The studio doesn't like it much. The bigger talent, if there was somebody interviewing you, they don't like it that much. But if you really made a mistake, it's okay to do that.
Especially if you're paying for the airtime. You own that airtime, and it is your right to ask for a redo, for sure. Catch the mistake, treat it like it's live, but catch the mistake, and if you did make one, and ask to redo it. And 99.9% of the time, they'll say yes. I had a recent experience with a talent who made a mistake, who made a fumble during some messaging, and it was a live TV segment, and I asked if we could edit a portion of that online link, and the producer said no. Live is live, and that's kind of how the cookie crumbles in that situation, and that's what you sign up for with live. You have to be able to be tactile and flexible enough to just go with it. And if there's a fumble, you just push through it, and most people won't even notice it. You just keep going, smile through it, make a joke, feel good about it.
You just reminded me of kind of a funny story. One of my very first TV segments that I ever did was for a big TV show. It was for the Regis Philbin show. Oh, wow. And I was representing a brand, but I was working for a hospital at the time. I was assistant chief dietitian at a hospital in New York City. And the hospital called me ahead of time and said, whatever you do, don't mention the name of the hospital on air. So I said, okay. So I go on, and I thought they said, roll it. And Regis says to me, oh, what kind of work do you do? So I said, oh, I'm a dietitian. He said, where do you work? So I said, a hospital. And he said, what hospital? And I thought I was going to cry. And I said, oh, uptown, because I just said that it was uptown. And he said, what do you work for, the KGB or something? And I thought, this is like the worst. I never want to do this again. And then all of a sudden the producer says, all right, get ready to roll. So that was not being recorded. But by then I was like,
so
all right.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting, but I also remember the days when we used to be able to get brands mentioned on top tier media so easily. And that has changed big time for many reasons. One is, it's important to disclose all the time. In those days, we didn't always, let's just say. And then the other thing is money. So the landscape of marketing and brand partnerships is really constantly evolving. So how do you stay ahead of the curve? How do you keep content fresh and engaging and newsworthy?
Well, I will share with you that, my bread and butter for the last 5 years was booking broadcast and leveraging nutrition talent for brands. And so, Purdue would call me and say, hey, we need to do a summer grilling on how to cook chicken to temperature. And we want to do dietitians and chefs and a combination. And so our team would book the talent, we'd book the airtime, come up with the creative, the scripts, the execution, and then the deliverables of obviously all of those TV segments. And we're just not seeing that at all. Very few and far between. Those revenue streams have all but dried up in the worst ways that I relied on before. So this is another example of looking down the barrel of what's happening in the media world and kind of figuring out what's next, where brands investing money. Because right now, PR firms are getting fired. So brands are working, a lot of them are pulling PR internal, which is good because it kind of cuts out the middleman. It's more challenging because brands are not spending the money to hire a third party like an RDTV, like a Good Life TV to manage those campaigns. And dietitians are not, they're smart and they're scrappy, and they're able to figure out how to book themselves and pay for the airtime or work with brands directly. So they also don't necessarily need a third party. So that has changed a huge amount of direction that we're, refocusing and doing another pivot to account for all of that. Because it's just the nature of the industry changing again.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I know that to make these things happen, it seems like it's so simple when we watch TV and we see these 1, 2, and 3 minute segments. It seems like it took nothing to put it together, but I know that it takes a lot. It takes a whole team. It takes so much pitching, and sometimes you're even involved in your own pieces where, as I mentioned earlier, you're the talent. So, do you have particular tools that you rely on? Have you ever learned about food styling yourself?
Oh,
How do
yeah.
you know these things?
You know, back when I first started Parker's Plate on my own, and this was in 2014 after I'd been let go from my hosting job of this Atlanta show that I'd launched called Atlanta Plugged In, I really, in my experience, learning how to do everything was the best way to manage entrepreneurship. I'd been talent for a long time, so I understood how to be on camera, but I had also learned how to produce and write, which is really important. If you understand how to write, because I can't tell you how many PR firms, I don't know where or who writes this stuff, but it's awful. And you're like, this is not conversational television. Let's rework this script or this messaging. And media buying. And at the time, my former operations manager said, Parker, why are you bothering with learning how to media buy? Because I took a class on how to do it. And she said, there are ad agencies who do media buying. Why would you need to do that? I'm like, because I want to learn how to do it. So when I hire somebody else to do it, I know that I'm not getting screwed. And, I understand how to price this and how to negotiate. And that was some of the best trajectory that I had, was learning how to do all of those things so that I could then really pinpoint when I could afford to, okay, what do I want to keep doing myself and what do I want to offload to other people on my team? And so
Mm-hmm.
that was a really, really, I think, smart way to handle it. A lot of people, but it's also okay. Like, there are certain people who just want to be talent. They don't want to deal with the scripting. They want to be handed a script and handed a paycheck. And that's fine too. Because there's certainly a place for working with incredible talent who just wants to be talent. But if you're starting out, I would understand all of those aspects, so you understand and it might mean that you love behind the scenes or food styling better than you do talking on camera. And there are avenues for that kind of revenue too.
Well, I just really want to interject something here about two things. One is about scripts. And I love to be given a script by the PR firm, by you. And the script you handed me was great because it takes a great writer to put together a script that speaks to what the brand is looking for. But I have never had a script that I didn't change. And I change my scripts all the time. And sometimes even in the car on the way to the studio, I'm making changes in my script because it has to be in my voice.
Yep.
And I think that that's a mistake that a lot of talents do, is that they read the script, memorize it,
Yeah.
and then they're sort of spitting it out without thinking about even just little words you could put in there that just sound more like you, so that it's not as robotic. So I think that it's just like, my message here is, if anybody's listening and they're ever given a script, read it. Don't be afraid to change it. And when you change it, write it out in just the way that you would say it. And that's the way that you should try to learn it. And the other thing I wanted to say, well, there's actually two other things, but the other thing I want to say about the script is that I then record my script onto my phone as a voice memo.
I do too. I do that too. And then
you do that too.
Then I listen to it. Yep.
Yeah. I listen to it while I'm making dinner. I listen to it while I'm taking a walk, and it helps me to understand the things that I want to change in it, or the things that I love in it that I want to remember. But it's a great way for me to remember it. So yeah, it's a great thing to do. A lot of people don't do that.
And have visual cues for those messaging elements on your table. So, if you're moving from making the pomegranate smoothie to sprinkling pistachios on a salad, you're looking at the salad and then you're visually cued, like, okay, there's the ramekin, and this is like the action item that I'm going to do that can then trigger the messaging for whatever that action item is. So
yeah, that's really a great important tip.
And I think that a problem with classic satellite media tours is that it's like show and tell. And so it's just message, brand, and it's a lot less interactive and doing. So I think it's important to be able to you're not just engaging the camera, you're looking at your table, you're interacting with those, food, whether it's the ingredients or a recipe or a final product. It's important to really have some sort of like noting down and referencing what you're speaking to, because that's what you would naturally do. Even if you have everything memorized, it's important to be able to look down and interact with your table.
And getting involved, that the talent also needs to get involved in what is being shown. So that this way, maybe there's like a more natural transition when you're talking, if things are moved around a little bit. And that's the kind of thing that I know that we've talked about things like that, but that the talent needs to talk about with the producer so that it's a smooth transition. And also, if there are major messages that you need to get out no matter what first, maybe leave the lesser messages towards the end on the table so that you could get to those messages first.
Well, and that's a good point. And to that, there are times when an anchor will, especially if you're live in studio, they'll point out, they're just kind of riffing and they're seeing something at the end of your table and they start with the product that you were going to talk about third, and it can completely throw you if you've memorized a script. But that way, if you understand the nuance of each action item that you're speaking to, then you can ebb and flow and it won't feel awkward to go from one side of the table to the other. Even if you've practiced going from the left side to the right side, you can then mix and match it. And in my experience, it also helps, especially in whether it's a Zoom or a live segment, the anchor is there to help you look good and sound good. So talk to them if you can before you go on about, hey, just wanting to let you know, I'm going to be talking about boop, 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 and kind of go through a quick run through so they know the order that you want to go in and a few of those key points. So they're sort of in it to win it with you.
I agree. And there are those anchors, though, that also go rogue, that have an agenda. Maybe there was something on the show a few days ago and they say something like, hey, somebody told me XYZ a few days ago. And I think that if I'm going to go on a show, I watch the show a few days before. I read some of the stuff that has been on their site because you want to be prepared. This is like doing your homework. It's not just about the segment that you're doing. You need to know who you're talking to and know what their audience is like too.
And know like the part of the country that you're speaking to as well, because that can inform, recipes that I would choose for an Atlanta segment would probably be different than the recipes I would choose for a Boston segment, for example. So be thinking about the audience that's going to be watching as well. And those are the kinds of things when you're really paying attention, Bonnie, that brands notice as well. And it makes them feel more confident in investing in you as talent when you've done that kind of homework.
Yeah, that's so true. I just thought of something with the food styling, because we talked about food styling before, that in my first SMT that I did for a new brand that I was working with, and we've done 6 SMTs since then, the food stylist set up everything. I walked in, it looked great. And then I walked out, and then I was walking back into the studio again, and she was just about to open a big case of kiwis. And I am highly allergic to kiwi.
Oh my gosh.
And nobody knew that. And just as she was opening, it's like I said, no, stop. And luckily she didn't, because I would not have been able to do the segment anywhere near it if I touched it. So as a talent, ask about what is it going to be shown also. That is so important, just in case you have any situations like that. You need to know those things ahead of time.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you do. And that can be, and also like take a break if you need to, like be able to, in a satellite media tour, you're handcuffed to a timetable, but make sure you have somebody who can give you the water and bathroom breaks when you need them, because that's a lot of pressure. And I know we've shared this before, like after a satellite media tour, you feel like you've run a marathon and it's just like, oh my gosh, I need a cocktail and bedtime like right now. So.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, we've been talking mostly about traditional media, which is not something that a lot of people who are on Instagram and Facebook, I know that this is actually how I got my media business going, is because a few people came to me. They had thousands of followers on social media, but they didn't know how to do an interview on TV. They didn't know where to look, what to say, what to wear, how to get off of a difficult question. So they asked me how to basically train them. And I did. And then a few of them said to me, you should really start your own business. So that's how that part of my business got started. But I was curious about you, and do you leverage social media to amplify your projects and your collaborations? Could you give some tips about creating engaging content and what you do on social media?
I think that, and it's funny because I didn't really prioritize my own social media the way I probably should have over the years, because my bread and butter was coming from TV. And so social for me was sort of an add-on or, added value. But now in the world of, superstars on social media with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, it can be hard to feel like you can compete with that kind of number. With people who have that sort of influence. And so I think it comes down to being more creative with your content and having some fun with it. I recently, it's funny, I used to just post either just personal stuff or the brand sponsored post about this recipe from Food Lion or whatever it might have been. And I'm celiac and can't have gluten, obviously. And it's not anything that I really talked about on social before, because I didn't want it to limit the kind of brands that I, would do outreach to me. If I wasn't doing the segment, obviously I could leverage a different expert. But I started doing product reviews of gluten-free breads because I eat them all the time. And I, no makeup, just like, all right, let's try this, frozen pizza. I'm a little hungover and this is why it tastes so good right now, and just like being super real, just me, like, whatever, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm just being me. And it's funny how much those types of posts can really resonate with people, where they're like, oh my God, I felt the same way, or I thought the same thing when I tried that, or, why don't you try this bread or this, it creates engagement. So that's been sort of a fun experiment. And I'm not saying that I couldn't maybe leverage those gluten-free bread brands for a partnership at some point down the road, but just focusing on enjoying it and kind of bringing me back to what I liked about media in the very beginning. It kind of brings you back to balance and brings you back to the beginning of why it was fun to just post about something that, you weren't getting paid for. So you're just doing it out of the fun and out of your own interests.
That's how a lot of partnerships evolve. And I think that it just goes back again to authenticity. You were just doing this because you like the brand. Mm-hmm. And I think that for anyone who's listening to the show, if you do want to work with brands, and there are certain brands that you love, that you use all the time, by posting about it, you never know what could happen. Those connections could be just started by your love of the brand and authenticity, and you could wind up actually doing work with them. Yeah. So I think that's great. I think it sounds like such fun, Parker. I love that you do that.
And I would have people all the time ask, like, I probably get as much, if not more, engagement sometimes on like fashion choices or like the dress that I got from Rent the Runway or whatever it is. And so and people would ask if, I'd come over and entertain, and people would be like, oh my God, where's your couch from? Where did you get that art piece? Because I love decorating. If this whole media empire thing doesn't work out, Bon, I'm going to be an interior designer. So I started a newsletter called Parker's Picks, because people were asking all the time about these other aspects, not just culinary, but lifestyle stuff, like from clothing to not really a focus on beauty products per se, but furniture, local artists, because I love supporting local artists. And the engagement was amazing. And just, 2 newsletters in, and it was like, I think the last newsletter, which it might sound like small numbers to somebody with a massive following, but it was like 64 new subscribers, and not just my stepmom, I was like, that's great,
That is so cool. Fun. Hey, listen, I'll put a link to Parker's newsletter in the show notes so people could just join. But I love that. I have a very funny story about that. So I don't usually post anything about fashion. And last summer we went to Italy, and people started asking me, where did you get your dresses? Because I wore dresses every day. So I decided to do a few posts on, actually it was one post on the dresses that I wore and the companies that made them. So after that, I got an email from one of the companies saying, we love that you love our dresses. We would really love it if you want to be our ambassador. We want to send you 10 dresses. What is your size? And what do you charge per placement to show that you're wearing our dresses. Well, I got so excited because that never happened to me
That's
before.
amazing.
I thought finally something different than food. So I told my husband, my son, his girlfriend were there. They were like congratulating me. It was wonderful. And then I showed the email to my other son who was in another room, and he looked and he said one word: fraud. It's like, what?
What?
What do you mean fraud? And I looked at the email address, which of course I hadn't looked at, and it was fraud.
Oh no.
I was so crushed.
Oh,
I was so crushed.
I had something similar happen with the fashion brand. You have to definitely pay attention to the email. But
yeah, so I learned the lesson with that. Anyway, Parker.
Oh no, I was going to ask you.
Yes, go ahead.
Are you, when you're doing outreach for brands now, are you contacting them like via PR person, or are you like reaching out on Instagram for contacts? How are you sourcing good brand contacts now?
You know, I have been very lucky throughout my entire career, where brands have come to me. It's really not that often that I would reach out to someone. So usually what would happen is that a PR firm would contact me and say they heard about me somehow and they wanted to send me product. And they would send me product, I would try it, and if I like it, then I would get back to them and say, you know what, I love this, my kids loved it. Would you ever think of partnering together or collaborating? And then they would hop on a call, and then we would see some of the things that we could do together.
Yeah.
And that's how most of my relationships work with brands, through PR firms or someone like you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great to know. And I think that there are new ways of accessing brand contacts. If you have a huge social media following, I mean, there are now social media agents that leverage relationships similar that like I would do on broadcast. So I think it's just getting creative and also understanding that a PR firm who might reach out to you about one brand, they often represent multiple brands. So be sure to ask about what kind of client portfolio they have with other brands
Mm-hmm.
that PR firm works with.
Mm-hmm.
That's another.
That's really important. But for anyone who's listening to this and feel like, oh, that's never going to happen to me because I don't have a big enough social following, I could tell you that, I mean, pretty much with assurance, the brands that have hired me over the years have not hired me because of my social following. Even if I have done social media campaigns for them, I do not have tens and thousands of followers. But if you want to follow me, it's at BTD Media on Instagram. But that's not why they're hiring me. And don't forget that I've been in this business for more than 30 years, which is before social media even existed.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a big following on social media, don't let that hold you back.
Definitely not. And, we were talking about authenticity. I think it's really important to also think about what really makes you a little bit different from, let's say you're a sports dietitian. Well, what makes you different from other sports dietitians in terms of your practice, in terms of your personality, in terms of what you would recommend to your clients, or the kind of foods that you would recommend, or diet plans, or whatever it might be. So really kind of think about, what is it about what you do that makes you different than other people in your field?
Yeah, probably the most important tip is that. But I would like to ask you two more questions that I like to ask all of my guests. And one is, looking back on your journey in the media landscape, what is one piece of advice that you wish that you received when you first started?
I would say don't be afraid to pivot, because it's the key to changing with the times, and nothing is going to be the same as it was. So when you can be flexible enough and also open enough to see when things are starting to change. So as an example, I think it was probably around 2 years ago that I thought, you know what, broadcast is never going to be dead, but this is scaling down in a way that I need to scale up something else. And that's one of the reasons why we started pivoting toward doing brand sponsored events, because people wanted to be more in person after the pandemic lifted and restrictions lifted. We're making pivots to do different types of brand partnerships outside of the space of just nutrition and traditional media, but more policy work and leveraging nutrition experts for agriculture brands on Capitol Hill. So I share that to say, like, there is always a way to take everything that you've learned, and it's not like now that business is dead. It's pulling what you know from what you've experienced in terms of your success and pushing it into a different space and leveraging your expertise in a different way.
That's cool. That's very true. There are new ways of looking at media that go outside of social media. I think that we're so focused on scrolling that not realizing how much more there is out there that we could be doing.
Yeah.
I love that. And could you provide one top tip for our listeners if they wanted to be more media savvy?
I think that if you're starting out, think about the local TV stations that you watch, the morning shows that your mom might watch over breakfast. Obviously, broadcast isn't as relevant because we are scrolling social and everything is on demand. But when you can figure out who the producer is of that morning show and find out if you can be an expert to come on unbranded, not working with brands, but just to get some laps around the track, as I always like to say, with, coming in and doing something for National Smoothie Day, and you talk about your top 3 smoothies and you start just getting that practice in. And the more you do it, the more the better at it you get. And the more you can leverage that for brand partnerships down the road. So that's what I would say for anyone who's trying to get started.
That's a great tip. That is a great tip. And I got started writing a story for my local newspaper, and then it became a column in my local newspaper, and then it went to a bigger newspaper, and then it became a international newspaper. So I think that when you start small like that, also when you're starting out, you may not have as much confidence.
Yeah.
So by starting more local, as your presence grows, your confidence grows as well.
And confidence, Bon, is the key to all of it. I always say that, whether it's going into a meeting to close a deal or speaking to somebody the first time about how you can help them or leverage their expertise for the greater good, when you are able to exude that confidence in who you are and what you bring to the table, that's as real as it gets. And anyone who is with you in that space is going to feel it and believe it.
Wow, absolutely. And I thank you so much for being on Media Savvy, because you brought the eye of the producer, which is usually not what we get to hear much of, especially because so many of the people we're dealing with are other people's until you get to the producer. So thank you so much. Could you please tell our listeners where they could find you?
Yes, thank you so much. You can find me on social at Parker's Plate, and then at Official Good Life TV is our lifestyle nutrition brand, where we work with many other nutrition and lifestyle experts. And you'll share the link to the newsletter for Parker's Picks. And
is that where someone can get in touch with you if they wanted to be your talent?
Oh, sure. Any of those spots. Yep. And Parker at parkersplate.com. So.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Parker.
Ani, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I hope we are working together soon. We have a project hopefully percolating, so.
I would love that. You know where to get me.
Thank you again.
Okay. Well, that is a wrap for today's episode of Media Savvy, and giant thanks to Parker Wallace for schmoozing with us while taking us along her media journey. And if you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, please subscribe to the show, write a review, and you know how much I would love it if you could tell your friends about it. So remember, it's not just about getting your name out there. It's about connecting with your audience in meaningful ways. And be sure to tune in next time. And until then, follow at BTD Media on Instagram for some insider tips and tricks. And don't be shy. Throw me a message if you have any questions at all. And by the way, you are looking mighty media savvy today. I'm Bonnie saying goodbye for now and see you in the spotlight.